Dear friends, Shabbat Shalom. I was chatting with a congregant recently who, noting where we stood in the Torah cycle, suggested that the reading of the 10 plagues seemed just about right for this moment with the rise of the Omicron variant, or as we call it in my quarantined household, the Oh My God variant. This week's Parashah Bo opens with the dramatic final plagues upon Egypt: locusts, darkness, and the slaying of the firstborn. I want to focus on the 9th plague, darkness. Take a look at your screens at Exodus chapter 10. Adonai said to Moses, "Hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched." Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was. But all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. To uncover the richness of these verses, I want to turn to that technique the rabbis utilized for the study of Torah, called by the acronym Pardes, because it explores 4 levels of meaning of every biblical verse: the pshat, the simplest, most literal meaning; the remez, the allegorical meaning; the drash, the meaning derived by comparing one biblical text with another; and the sod, the secret or mystical meaning found by the Kabbalists. Let's start with the pshat, the simple, literal meaning, and the second text on your screen. For Rashi, the French medievalist, darkness meant physical darkness. And so he comments on verse 21 that the darkness of night will be even blacker and darker. We know that when we go out at night, even on a cloudy night away from the city lights, once our eyes adjust a bit, we are able to see something. The sky is never pitch black. But according to Rashi, this darkness was so dark that it actually paralyzed the Egyptians. They could not see even their hands in front of their faces or their feet to move. Remez means hint. And at this level of interpretation, each word hints at a meaning beyond the literal. In this next text from the Babylonian Talmud, the rabbis examine another connotation of darkness as we might apply it to a different sort of human experience. Our masters taught, when Adam, on the day of his creation, saw the sun sinking in the sky before him, he said, "Woe is me! Because I acted offensively, the world is darkening for me and is about to return to darkness and desolation. Indeed, this is the death that heaven has decreed for me." So he sat down to fast and to weep throughout the night, while Eve wept beside him. According to the book of Genesis, on the 6th day of creation, God made Adam. According to rabbinic legend, when Adam opened his eyes for the first time and gazed upward, beholding the sun shining the light of day upon him, he rejoiced. But as the hours passed and he noticed the sun sinking in the sky, Adam was overcome with fear. Was he now being punished for eating the forbidden fruit? And what would become of him, he wondered, should the sun vanish altogether from the heavens? And so, in desperation, Adam extended his hand toward those heavens, attempting to grab hold of the sun and push it higher in its orbit. But of course, he could not reach it. And as the sun dropped lower and lower, Adam grew more and more afraid, until finally, when the sun disappeared below the horizon and its light grew dimmer and dimmer, Adam and Eve felt utterly alone, abandoned, even by the God who had made them. So darkness can also signal this feeling of abandonment, of isolation, of anxiety, of the loss of hope. Most of us are not, thank God, in the precarious position we once were with COVID. We have vaccines and treatments, and this variant's illness appears less severe. But these are nonetheless frightening and, for some, lonely times. We are hesitant once again to be with family and friends. Many of us may well feel a bit paralyzed by a creeping anxiety. We can relate to Adam's fears. At the drash level of exegesis, the rabbis similarly turned to other biblical texts to to unlock the meaning of the passage they were studying. Take a look at the next two from Exodus and Genesis. If darkness signals abandonment and anxiety, light signals presence, specifically God's presence. Exodus 3. Now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest in Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. An angel of Adonai appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? When Adonai saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. Genesis 1. When God began to create the heaven and the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, Let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening and there was morning, a first day. The two passages appear unrelated, but the rabbis believed otherwise. They pointed out that an unconsuming flame is not fire at all, but rather flickering light. You may have caught the fascinating article about just this possibility in last week's New York Times. And the rabbis pointed out that in the story of creation, the light made on the first day must have had as its source something other than the sun, moon, and stars, because those were not created until day 4. And then they count the number of times the bush is mentioned in Exodus 3, 5 times, I highlighted them for you, and the number of times light is mentioned in Genesis 1, 5 times. And they conclude that the source of the light is one and the same, God. The light was a signal of God's presence to Moses. The light in the Israelites' tents was a signal of God's presence for them. And finally, the sod, the secret or mystical level of interpretation, often found in the masterwork of mystical literature, the Zohar, which suggests that the light of God's presence should kindle hope for the future. Follow with me. That light functioned in the world only on the first day of creation. After that, it was hidden away and no longer seen. Rabbi Yehuda taught, had it been hidden away altogether, the world would not have been able to exist for one moment. But it was only hidden like a seed that generates others, seeds and fruit. And the world is sustained by it. There is not a day that something does not emanate from that light to sustain all things. For it is with this that the Holy One nourishes the world. So according to the Zohar, even in what seems the blackest darkness, the light is never truly absent. Even when eclipsed, it is there. As a seed unseen beneath the earth sprouts new life, so the unseen light of God's presence generates hope for brighter days. To return to the story of Adam, unbeknownst to him, with the setting of the sun, God had created the first Shabbat. And with it, God gave Adam 2 stones of flint, that Adam might strike them together to create a spark of fire and of light and of comfort. His fear and loneliness gone, Adam cried out, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei me'orei ha'esh. Blessed are you, Adonai, my God, who creates the lights of fire. And thus God gave Adam the gifts of light and hope with which to dispel both the darkness falling around him and rising within him. With the sun set on this 6th day of the week, at the end of a week that may remind many of us of the isolation, anxiety, and abandonment of the pandemic's first dark days, we too can kindle light and hope this Shabbat. And just as that light brought comfort to Adam and Eve, so may it bring us warmth and assurance of the better days that do indeed lie ahead. If the early days of 2022 seem a bit reminiscent of the early days of 2021, we must remember that in reality they are not. And perhaps our greatest encouragement should come from a truth so obvious we may easily forget it. We have been through challenging moments before and are here to tell the story. We will get through this setback too, together. Together again, we will move from the darkness of anxiety into the light of hope. Shabbat Shalom.